Okay, thank you everybody for returning. I know that you have been anxiously awaiting to hear from the 35th Undersecretary of the Army, the Honorable Gabe Camarillo. He was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on February 3rd, 2022, and sworn in on February the 8th. As the Undersecretary of the Army, Mr. Camarillo serves as the Army's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Management Officer, helping oversee a budget of more than $170 billion and sharing responsibility for the manning, training, and equipping of more than 970,000 soldiers across the active, Guard, and Reserve components. Mr. Camarillo is also responsible for the Army's enterprise management and business operations, as well as budget development and execution. And he has a distinguished career in serving in previous assignments as well with the Army and the Air Force, and he has a law degree from Stanford University. So I am very happy to have you here with us today. Unfortunately, we were originally going to have a chat that included the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Heidi Shue. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it here today, so we had to pivot last minute. But I think that this is going to be, just as valuable for the small business owners who have come to be here with us today. So, sir, I just wanted to, do you have any opening comments for folks?
Well, first of all, Kim, thanks for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I think this is the second year in a row that I've had the privilege of being in this room talking with all of you. I apologize for being a little bit late. I was wrapping up another panel, and I ran across the convention center to get here, so I hope it wasn't too much of a wait. And I also want to start by thanking Ms. Bueller, who I have worked with for many, many years, and I will just say that the Army has no better, no stronger advocate for small business than Kim Bueller. She is in my office very regularly. She always raises issues of concern from the community and brings them to my attention. So I want you all to feel comfortable that we have a very strong advocate for the community sitting to my left. So thank you, Kim, for your work.
Thank you.
I really do appreciate it. And somebody who's a seasoned contracting professional as well as a strong advocate for small business, and the marriage of those two works really well. What I think I want to do today is to make this a little less formal. In the past, I think I've stood at the podium and given remarks. I'll update you a little bit at the beginning on kind of where we are in a couple of initiatives, and then really leave time for Q&A more than anything. The first I would say is when I stood here a year ago, I had just recently been confirmed not that long into the job. And I remember I said to Kim, we've got to take an assessment of where we are in the R&D innovation small business space. We wanted to do some forensics to figure out were there folks who were exiting the market for reasons that we needed to get a better handle on. And we did the empirical research. I think we worked with an FFRDC to kind of help us work through it. And we found that there was some contraction of the small business innovation research base for the Army. Part of it is attributable to the decline in OCO, Overseas Contingency Operation Funds, after 20 years of combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So some of those small business opportunities just dried up. The other part of the story, however, was that we found that there were entrants who probably didn't work with the Army that maybe had been before. So we needed to take another look at what we were doing to incentivize small business participation, even though the Army has the brunt of it, I think, in the Department of Defense, just given our size. What I will say is about a year ago, we announced a set of initiatives that were designed to do that. I felt that the conversation about small business participation in the Army tended to focus a little bit too often on direct awards from the Army to a small business vendor. And I think those are absolutely critically important. They are the areas and the metrics by which we get measured every single year, and there is a determined push to meet those goals every year. However, I will say that given the health of the industrial base, we need to do more. And so we looked at, in addition to the direct awards, everything from SIBR and SITR grants to small business set-asides that are very important, we wanted to look at ways to incentivize other companies to team with small business in a way that maybe was more responsive to the set of concerns and priorities we had in the Army. So, one of the initiatives we came up with, for example, the one I'm really proud of, is Project Vista, and we talked about it last year. And this was a really novel approach to small business contracting. We determined that, and this is great, if we could incentivize a prime vendor, usually an integrator, to team with small businesses that the Department of Defense, and notice I said defense, not just Army, have made some investment in. And what does that mean? It could be investment in an OTA that was funded by some lab in the Army, or by the Air Force or Navy or DoD. It could be a SBIR grant that just didn't quite make it over to the Valley of Death into a Phase 3 or beyond award. And we were trying to incentivize vendors that if you use any of these technologies that we have invested in previously, we will give you source selection credit in programs of record. And so the plan was to develop a list of programs where we would test this out. They were relatively small ACAT 3, ACAT 4 programs. I'm pleased to say that I think 3 or 4 of them are off to the races where we are in source selection after having made that criteria publicly available. I think there's a couple of other programs a little bit larger that are due to come out in FY24 that will do that. One of them, for example, is our SMET autonomous robotic program that's out of PEO, CS, and CSS. So that's one to look out for. And if the model works, our hope is that it will be something that we expand now that we've figured out how to do this in source selection. So that is just one example where I think we're making some definitive progress on some of the goals that I had set out for the team about a year ago. In addition to that, I think I had talked a year ago about the need to protect intellectual property for small business. We knew that that was an issue of paramount concern if we were going to continue to incent the innovation that we know that comes out of the small business space. Part of the reason we have not been very good at that in the Army in the past was a lack of expertise and training. And this goes to our program managers and our contracting officers who really weren't well trained in the range of options about how to work with industry on IP. So it kind of defaulted in the past, and we all know it, to either try to ask to buy all of the IP or assume that you're not going to have any of it and that you're locked into a very troublesome business arrangement for the Army. We all know the reality is that there's a wide spectrum of options and choices in between there. So we said, let's bring about some experts into the Army. We called it the cell of experts, of IP expertise, to help us advise the way our programs are going to be structured, how the acquisition strategies are going to be formed, to be able to begin to incentivize more balanced approaches to intellectual property. I'm very pleased to report that we have begun the hiring and the deployment of that cell. It's going to work with all of the PEOs and a large number of contract actions across the Army, and we are getting some really good talent. Folks who have, for example, in some cases served as IP lawyers in the private sector and now want to come and do something good for their country and work for the Army. So we're saying that they all got smarter. And, and we're bringing in some real talent to help us in these areas. So I'm very excited about that. There's another initiative we did about a year ago, and it was focused on teaming for larger SBIR awards, grant awards, those instances in which you have small business vendors that are working on critical technologies that are important to the department and to the Army, and we're matching them with essentially prime vendors or integrators that will work with them in a teaming arrangement so that we can make sure that some of the investments that we're making through SBIR transition over into a program of record and they can bridge that valley of death. So what you're trying to see here in all of this is my goal is find other ways to bridge the gaps. It's not just with sole source direct awards, even though I know that's important. It's finding a multitude of ways to make sure that we can try to make sure that we're incentivizing the adoption of those technologies that many of you here in the room are investing your private capital, your workforce talent, and your own expertise to be able to bring that to bear for the Army. So I'll pause my opening by just saying thank you so much for what you do for our soldiers. There is a reason that the Army has maintained its technical advantage over all potential adversaries, and it is because of the capabilities that we receive from our industrial base. And I'll just say, if you look at the news over the last year, how much demand there is for Army capabilities around the world. as we've seen as a result of the Ukrainian invasion by Russia, there is a strong demand signal that the United States Army's capabilities are the best in the world. And most countries want to either buy them or emulate them as best as possible. And in no small part, that owes to the innovation of our small business space as well. So I'll pause there and see if we want to have more free-flowing conversation.
I think that sounds great. And ironically, several of the items that you mentioned have come up over the course of the morning already.
Good.
You know, whether it's a vendor who's seeking some assistance with IP, particularly around cyber, right? So got a client set up, a small business client for that sell. So they'll have maybe be customer number one. Also heard from folks about, you know, barriers and ways to get through that valley of death. So I think that we are doing very innovative things and taking that holistic approach, which was really your vision. Right. So I think this is the right audience to continue that conversation with. And, you know, as they're formulating and getting their questions together, and we encouraged them under the last go-around to not necessarily be beholden to our questions, but to, you know, come up and ask their questions as they have them. So we'd encourage you to do that as well today. You know, the Army's investing in a lot of new areas, right? So whether it's energy demand reduction, clean energy tech, immersives, autonomy, AI, machine learning. Are there any particular areas where you see opportunity for small businesses, or where we are acutely interested in what the private sector can bring into to experiment with us?
Yeah, no, Kim, that's a very great question. I think it's a broad question also, you know, because I think there aren't areas of our critical technology needs where I don't feel that the small business space has something to offer. I think that if you look and do the research, there are particularly compelling offerings and critical technologies that are being matured across the entire spectrum. So a lot of the companies that we are either entered into a cyber with reflect that wide spectrum, or in many cases what we're doing in terms of prototyping of technologies. I think we see a lot there. As I speak to these kinds of audiences, you know, I think you've seen kind of where we are from the perspective of our national defense strategy. The pacing challenge is the People's Republic of China. It is making sure that we can contribute as part of a joint force in the Indo-Pacific region to ensure that we deter Chinese aggression. So what does that mean? You see that our investments as an Army are in certain critical areas that have not changed for the last few years. Making sure that we have the best technology, best capabilities as it relates to air and missile defenses, that we develop long-range fires that are ground-based to be able to engage targets at great distances, that we are able to, of course, utilize data on the battlefield to ensure that we maintain command and control in an integrated way as part of a joint force, and that we also deal with contested logistics in that particular region, which is a critical challenge for us. And part of dealing with contested logistics is reducing the demand of not just you know, things like fuel, but also the transport requirements for a lot of the equipment that we would be asked to use in the Indo-Pacific theater. For example, many of our air and missile defense systems, they are very costly and cumbersome to move around the world. Anything we can do to make them more easier to transport, to make the systems that we use more energy efficient, all of those things make a critical difference. So I just painted a very brief 30-second sketch of the entire problem in one theater. But I think that if you break that down, there are a lot of places where small business can contribute. You know, and I'm sure that you all can probably answer the question much more effectively than I can.
I've heard you talk a lot about interoperability and the potential for open systems architecture. And can you pull the thread on that a little bit? How you see that transforming how the Army operates and how we go about building our acquisitions and our platforms?
Yeah, no, it's I think the Army has been probably the most successful service in leaning into MOSA and open architectures as it relates to our acquisition strategies for major platforms. We've done it for example, very effectively in our aviation portfolio. So those of you small businesses that are Huntsville-based, that have worked either with our lab at AVMIC or PEO Aviation, or have teamed with many of the prime contractors that work on upgrading and developing our aviation rotary wing platforms, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It is the push to make sure that that entire system-level architecture has as much robust competition as possible, that we are managing it as a team, understanding that we need to bring the best of breed capabilities into our platforms, and we do that very, very well in aviation. So, today the Chinooks, Apaches, and Blackhawks that we're flying with are very different than the ones that we fielded 5-10 years ago, mostly because they've been enabled by that government-managed architecture that we've worked with the primes, but we've worked with small business to be able to contribute to. And it is a wide ecosystem. I know, for example, their iteration of MOSA, which is the FACE aviation architecture, they meet as a consortium or as a kind of a team of industry companies on a regular basis to discuss the architecture, to discuss those standards, and to be able to ferret that out. I think it's a good model for how we need to do business. We're starting to see it as well on the Mission Command portfolio out in Aberdeen and what they're doing on that space, and we're beginning to see it in other areas like ground combat systems as well. So I'm very excited for the future.
Okay, all right, excellent. I see we do have a gentleman who's brave enough to ask the first question.
Great.
Thank you for being here. Real quickly, first off, I think the community appreciates what you've done the last year. Your stewardship, and you've been successful, and that we can see the differences as they start to grow into the community from a technology perspective. I represent a lot of companies, small businesses, tremendous amount of logistics area. One of my interests on contested logistics is that when you go to solve strategically contested logistics, it's not putting a platform against it. There is no platform you can put against contested logistics. It's finding the little pieces where you can make a difference within the entire deployment process strategically as you go in, which really matches very well with small business. The issue that we had, and maybe the CFT will solve it, we don't know yet, okay? But the issue we've had is the ability to be able to focus where those things are most needed. Where is it that I can make the biggest change today to make a change in that entire sector and getting at contested logistics? So my question is how does the Army at this stage with the CFT, okay, envision it can look at those little places that it has to touch and be able to influence this community, which it has a lot of power to support the Army, to support you in attacking contested logistics?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you, sir, for raising it. I agree with you that it's an area that's ripe for innovation and participation from small businesses. I think there are many companies that are tackling this in the private sector and the commercial sector already today. So some of these problem sets, we've got a way to figure this out. All we have to do is put it into an operational context that would make sense for us in this particular theater. That being said, the first step to knowing you have a problem is admitting you have one. So that was what we tried to do by setting up the CFT, the cross-functional team on logistics, on contested logistics, earlier this year. And what Army Futures Command and General Rainey are going to do there is ensure that we are doing it soup to nuts. So I think the first part is what you just said, sir. It is figuring out from a power projection standpoint and a deployment process, what are the things that we can do along the timeline that will enable us to be much more expeditious, be able to reduce our timelines, to be able to be responsive to crisis, and to be able to understand how we can overcome that tyranny of distance in the theater. There is a second part of that as well, and that's how we're looking at it as it relates to command and control of intra-theater assets, to understand how we would reposition, how we would move, how would we support the joint force in that particular theater, just given the capabilities that we employ today and that we need to develop. So you're thinking about everything from like watercraft that does intra-theater movement all the way to fuel and water distribution and storage at the point of need, there's a lot of room for innovation in that space. And then lastly, it's command and control of all of this. So how do you ensure that you have the right site picture in a contested environment to ensure that you understand where your assets are, how you have redundancy, and where you need to move things? Again, if you talk to a lot of private sector companies today, they probably have to deal with it. Probably not in as contested environment as we may have to face, but they deal with similar problem sets. So I think there's a lot we can learn there. I'm going to give the CFT a little bit of time to kind of put their analysis and their work together so that we can begin to figure out what requirements need to be dusted off the shelf, revised, replaced, and what opportunities will come out of that to help us to be able to be a very responsive part of the joint force.
Gosh, it's a quiet crowd here.
It is before lunch, or maybe it is lunchtime. That could be it.
I don't know. Is that it? I don't know. So, we've talked a lot this morning about barriers. And, you know from your time working in industry and working with small businesses that they face many different barriers in working with the government, whether it's as a prime or as a subcontractor. What are the things that you're most concerned about, or even the areas where you think we can be the most effective in reducing those barriers? The integrator incentives are intended to get to some of those, but what are your thoughts around other barriers that small businesses might face?
I think we still have a challenge, Kim, with transparency. And it's not deliberate efforts to obfuscate where we are in the process. But I do think that, I gave the example of somebody else. If you are on the other end of a contract award and you have no idea when that's going to happen, and you keep getting told by the KO, hey, it's imminent, maybe this quarter, maybe early next quarter, and you're carrying, kind of an RFP proposal team. You're carrying a set of, I'm assuming, engineers in some cases. You are essentially paying for that time in order for you to wait for the award. If you're a small business, that's no small feat. I mean, I think that is significant. It costs money. It prevents you from being able to use those resources elsewhere to win and earn more business. And so I think us communicating and being as transparent as we can is an obstacle that I think we can do better on. I have challenged the contracting community in the Army, and not all contracts are awarded by the Army, right? So we do a lot of Army requirements that are offloaded to other organizations that we don't control. But I think that on the contracts we're administering and awarding, I'd like for us to find a way to be much more collaborative about where we are in the process, what are the projected timelines, how do we prioritize some of those actions, can we not redo things that don't have to be redone to kind of streamline reviews and the like as much as possible. Those are all good intentions, right? But I think we absolutely have to find a way to be more transparent with all of you to be able to convey that. I think if we do that, then at least the small business vendor base has a little bit more certainty around which to plan. And then you can say, okay, well, it's probably going to be about a year. It's really complex. I'm going to take this team off and we're going to go after this other proposal and we'll wait and see what happens. I'd like us to get to that kind of discussion and that level of transparency. I joked with the team. You literally, if you ordered a pizza online from Domino's, you have better clarity about where your pizza is than you will on your contracting award. So sometimes people just want to know, is it baking in the oven or is it being packaged? Is it out for delivery? That's kind of what we're thinking about. And so we're trying to find ways to kind of get after that. That'd be one that I'd be very supportive of us trying to find a better way to do a better job on.
Yeah, Megan Dake and I were talking about that last week as a matter of fact. And we've committed that we're going to get together with the contracting leadership early first quarter so that we can start talking through some of these barriers and how we're going to get after them and how we're going to partner with the require activities.
Absolutely.
The PEOs, the PMs, to really start getting after not only opportunity, but how we can be more transparent. And then if there's any kind of way we can use technology to take that burden off the contracting officers, because a lot of it comes down, I think, to workload.
Yeah.
As well as fear, right? Fear that they're going to give one industry partner some insight that another one doesn't get, so then they tend to hold information and not talk to them, to industry as openly as possible. So if we had a way to take that burden off, to underwrite the risk, I think that would be absolutely be doing a service for not industry writ large, not just the small businesses.
No, I think so. And I think we can find a way to disseminate and share information with everyone. So I don't think it has to be point to point. I think there's ways for us to make sure that those issues are transmitted broadly to the broader community.
So awesome. But yeah, I have often thought about that. You know, I can track my package, I can track my pizza, but I have a hard time tracking my, where's my requirement?
Exactly.
Because I have a contract too, right? I have to deal with Army contracting, and
That's right.
I love them. I am one, but it can be frustrating for sure. So I have a question for you. So you have, I said in the beginning, you've had different appointee positions within the department. You've been a senior VP at SAIC before you came back to the department. What keeps bringing you back?
I would like to say it's the salary and the food, but that's probably not true in either case. Actually, it's the people and the mission. I just left a digital transformation panel that we had across the convention center. And, what makes it really fun for me is there are big institutional challenges and obstacles that keep us as an Army from sometimes getting where we need to be. And sometimes they're big challenges that you can really help catalyze change from being in a leadership role. And so having the fortune and privilege of being asked to serve in this role, it gives me an opportunity to move the ball forward on those areas, whether it's making sure that the foundational policies and investments and approach and strategies are right to help us get to a digitally transformed Army that's capable of competing in the 21st century, or it's ensuring that we have the best of breed technology and capabilities for our soldiers by ensuring we have the access to the full cross section of the industrial base. Those are hard things, and so they take a lot of institutional fortitude and creativity and challenge. And so I think that's what has always appealed to me in coming into these roles, is taking those on and trying to leave the Army a little bit better than maybe you found it when you first got here. And then I think the other thing I'll say is, coming into these roles, I've worked in a lot of institutions, a lot of organizations. You're never going to find a place where literally everyone is aligned to a common purpose. And it is getting the mission done, protecting our soldiers and their families, and making sure that they get home safe. How can anyone not be motivated, highly motivated to do that every day? And if you get to be part of a team where everyone is aligned to the same purpose, it's a really incredible experience. So for those of you who have not already served as a civilian or as an appointee or as a soldier, I highly encourage it, and we highly encourage it for your family members and your friends as well.
Every morning when I drive into work and I see that Washington, D.C. skyline, and I see the monuments and Capitol Hill, I'm reminded, and then I see the Pentagon, I'm super reminded of, why I come to work every day. And
absolutely.
It's inspirational, and if that doesn't get you every morning, I don't know what will.
That's right.
Yeah, so I understand that we're at the end of our time here.
Oh, we have one more question.
We do have a question. Okay.
I'm going to drive my team crazy. Let's do your question, sir.
Thanks.
This is how I got in trouble on the last panel.
That's the way it works. Sean Carberry, National Defense Magazine. I know you said you wanted to give the CFT time to pursue its work, but I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on sort of the mandate, the focus areas, the priorities, and a little sense of timeline of, is an initial sort of feedback period, how is it going to play out?
Yeah, it's too early to tell, and I think they've taken, since we established it in March, the CFT is going to take some time to assess the Army's role in the joint warfighting concept, specifically as it relates to contested logistics with an emphasis on the Indo-Pacific theater. I know that the CFT has gone through with Army Materiel Command the wide range of requirements that we currently have today, some of which haven't been updated in 10, 20 years in some cases. And then also prioritizing the mission threads that are going to be the most relevant for us as a joint force. That's hard work. I mean, it's not something that has let's turn it around in 6 months. It could be a little bit longer. So I'm going to give them the time to do it. I wish I had a better definitive timeline or deadline for them to kind of come back and say, here's the first batch of requirements that we're going to really focus in on. I'll defer to General Rainey and the ASC team to kind of articulate what that would be. But it will include a lot of what we've talked about here, the C2 elements of it, the intra-theater transport and lift requirements, ensuring that we have the right attention paid to Army prepositioned stocks, fuel and water distribution, all of the enablers that are a critical part of it.
We have time for one more?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Last one.
Anudata. Thank you so much. Anudata from Aptricity. My question is, what has been the most exciting change that you have seen in the last year in IT modernization?
In Army modernization?
IT modernization.
Oh, in IT modernization. Well, a lot. I just spent 2 hours talking about it. I will say that, when I got here, the Army was really focused on, we knew we had to transform, but we were late adopters. I mean, the commercial sector, the private sector was way ahead of where we were. So I think a lot of the conversations at these types of conferences was like, hey, this is important because software is embedded in everything. It's important that we ensure we pay off technical debt, that we transform our capabilities. So we knew that we had a problem. I think the response early on, really for the last 8 years, was let's start a bunch of pilots and let's figure out what we learned from it. I think we've moved past that, and I've really kind of pushed the team to say, let's move into a focus on what are those foundational elements of success that we need in order to ensure we get where we need to go. So whether it's, if we're take your pick of any issue, changing the requirements process for software development to go from a static, very specific set of requirements into more generic ICDs and capability need statements that are more abstract and help us work with industry in a more iterative way. It could be the fact that we are now changing the way that we're doing software sustainment. In other words, we're walking away from the static model that software goes into a formal sustainment mode. It's obviously going to be continuously upgraded and refined over time. That lifecycle model over time doesn't quite work for software-based capabilities. And if you look at how we're going to the cloud, for example, we had created an office, we were investing in pilots, but now what we're focusing on is, really how do we create well-funded tools and capabilities to be able to enable all of the system owners to be able to transition their applications to the cloud in a unified, systematic, and cohesive way. I mean, data, I could talk hours about that. Focusing on the data governance part. It's not very sexy, but like if you don't have authoritative, good data, you're not going to be able to do much with it. So that's a process, institutional reform that needs to be done, and we've made a lot of ground, or covered a lot of ground in that area. So I'm excited about all of those, but what I'm more excited about is the acceleration that if we're successful, it will enable and empower moving forward.
So speaking of post-production sustainment,
Yes.
I know as a PEO you guys are going and pivoting from sustainment into an enhancement mode and pivoting to have requirements that are rolling constantly. How can we work together with you as small businesses to be able to incorporate that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we need your input. So we are working to define what that future state looks like. So I think the idea that we would throw everything over to a software engineering center, for example, that would continuously do all the sustainment with no enhancements or upgrades, I don't think that's the future we envision. So how do we make sure that we are planning for and programming for the continuous upgrades over time? I think as we pursue some of these open architectures, we open up our aperture and ways we can do it, it just will create more opportunities for small business. And we look forward to hearing your input on those.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Well, sir, your team is on the move.
I know.
So I think that means you have to be on the move as well.
I'm getting the hook. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm so glad that we're doing this at AUSA. Thank you all for your participation, for your contributions to our national security, and for your support for our soldiers. Thank you very much.
Okay, I believe the next thing on the agenda is lunch.